Mani vorun qati mani vorun qati رقب من يمي يخاتي cumrina manatra dagahi iki dünya azina iki dünya azina خابن يتختمت فينا
أترمغ بشلام على خوني تبكي فنسبايلا انتلاشي بدانت خز أتراد أديولا أخن كتلاشي بكاز بيوبت فتاخون قبليتون مشينا عايتون بسيمة أشبت مدرب طبقة موخون خمشيخ مشاهدة كي خرز رابا مليتلن سودانتلن خانتبي رابا شافرتتلن كتم يقرأ نوري بتبابا انترفيوي دالي تويمن سوالو شميتم كت خزيتم تخمنيات خاناش ديان كت ديتا بدر من أمريكا بخايلي إن عارفين أوديات أوترالية إن كما بود أوترالية بدايلة كما بود أوديات ديو بدايلة أنا كشرط خرزة وين خش من آخر هم زمن إن من قم دانا يقرأ شنوري مدبشانتيتون
بسيم رابع مدرك كتشتوخون هايتون بسيم رابع بغدان قد تخبر
أنا خاب وأوتت لي من أطري مغرب قد خرزة جاشو كتم أخنا قد نسني قويتا أكما هدامي كتاتيني من فرخيني قد أبرس خزوة أبي أووده سبب أخنا قد لاصات خرزة جشبتت لن خيرت ديوخون بتشبرنا دا خرزة أختوخن جهل ديان كتيتون بتوات اتلوخن دانا اتلوخن يلفان ديو تيمو بمهيران قد أبرس خزوة كامو مسابقة خرزة شبر نخده سام بريش عبيدن أنا خدنا انترفيو بعدين إن بوس ولا فرسو بخينا آتيني كتم سي خاصة مخينا من خرزة مرخطية أنا نقيت هلا كتا كميتي بوجر بسني أو ديان بوزو داوي كتصات ديان مزجودة أختوخن أو تون كان حاضر ممكن نقول بخشاوقنا نقيت ديان أريال جيل بوزو دلا جملة النخراي جفرساي جارنا ما تويت خط لبط بيايد بإمناش بتاعنا أخنا جواد ديان لم بضيع
أختوخن
ويلا
هايران بطلابتون كتاتي ببرس خزبة ختمة ختمة همزمياتو دي ختمة هي البته رابس ديكتل رابس منتينتا بتويا بس سأتوخن مزودهاتون
خطوصة خانا أتيني خان نقبة نشأت يعني بود نشد آتورت اودیام زمانی با آودیات دیام زمانی خاصه نقد یموی نواده گبیت هر حوله نتیبه اکن پرخنان پریشه تون دان پریشه بود سپورت آتورات اینا دنیا طاول نا سویدن ایتن تیم سپایت فوتبال انا مليانه كتخنا امسخم بديت حاجه خن همزم خن سام بريشه خرزه بيني لا اخ انترفيو بعد سبايلر موضوع مي قوم دنيا سبايلر هنا خاصه ماكينه قال له مزيد داخل
أنا بخشاون أختوخن من شو تابوت لوس أنجلس فأمرانة طلبيتون كت سنيك دتخناشتون خاكم يتبياتون شتسيتون أنا همون من قد كمسي هيران أبي
ما جاك طلباخن
أنا زب طلبن أنا زب
شلشن شاقب هل تطلبه إما زب طلباخن
أنا زب شلشن هيران
سبب أنا كشو تابوت مين كات تيمو خسام أشكرهم قد خرزة أبرت الشبتة أودياتهم مضي منهم قدام ديتا بخايتهم ككل خنا شخين يزتون يوم كنت آتون كأيواتون يوم كمن الرامتون يوم كتا سامن خرزة مرخطلة أنا كماي بعدي بخ أنا خب داني كم متو يومن خرزة بشر كماي من كل الدنيا زنترفيو بعد خمسون باصور زلق مايا إنا ما خش شخلا بجواتني خاب تارخين قالوا خج بناخن ساطم مزيد دخلهم يصير خو ساطم خمخنا
أنا بخشى رابط تخمنت شابرتلا شو تابوت لوس أنجلس كخمشة كسوية بيتا خمس تلانا شدراني كتخبراني خات أودياته شبتة لشبتة يفلون مخربلون قبني أمتن الرابط تخمنت شابرتلا بخشى بنجريك خطبكتو أويا بتجبران شو تابوتا وبالصيتا أنا بخشى رابط متأوينتلا
أنا هذيك مغوريات شدنا كيوم تكالو سلاك
هي
خب مثل خدنا فيلم كدود من مغزيل رد كاربت كاتويتين أنا مشوف أنا قاعد تاننون من جانب من قاعد لخا جتوني همزمي تاني أوليات الداير خدين آهلة
دوزي له
ليش يرخاتني تاني وأخو
لا دوزي تنختوخن أنا بخشابن حتما جاء شولا أبي هم كداني رابط سبايله هم كبني أمتا هبياتي كت كالوسو لاقي إيميل وأوديات خين كتتلون أنا همونا بين كت رابا أنا قاينا رابا لازمينا سب قدي تلفون بياشله بتقطوس أوديو مرة نورك كالوسو لاقي إيميل مري كالوسو لاقي مخبرت له كم تتشلو خوشن هدامة فيهم خرطزة مخبرت إلى الباسر بيرخه إنا يعني هدام ما بيتون كتكاتي وخو مخبريات آتي إتكما بس بالي جو برسخز وزاتي أني شلون أديلت
ريش ديار خوائله كاتين شادون فلايرز كت أنا أودياتي قشوتا فوتيتن خو أنا تانوية من كامو بجواب خدود التانوية من إنك مسبابتو يخ أودا من شوتا فوتا عاوغي خرزة آتي تاني قدا يرخي بتايلا أنا أودياتي تلان هيرت طلبيتو من ناشي كده هدميتم مروخيتم لا وتهدميتم زميتم كاموناش هدمولينا بايا كامون هدمولينا بزيادة أنا كل كثرنا كشو تابوت أتلم الدكان خين زتلم
دوزيلا أنا همون بين أتخبنتوخ ونجريك خشبوش سيريس تو كخلا تبقى بيه البته أختوخن خرزة متيتون ل ساعتوخن زويتون مزجودة بداها رابع من
أنا مزيدي إطلاع صوتي قشبتها
يشبتها
أنا بشوف خرزة تنيتها ودن إطلاقي قشبتها تريقبتو داخل خاقي كشبتها كل يوم مدن يوم درويتا كم خرزة خاتها بينو أدي أرويتا خرزة لان كانت قاوتا كانتو مغزيهم أوديات أستراليا تري خرزة خاتي قد أشبتها بيديوا كم صار قد بلادنو داخل كامو مساب أوديات بس إيتين إن أود بيا كتمسيني عشولا أوديجا أنا جو تاني يومان خا فيديو بيديم طيلة كتيبة جو برلمانة أستراليا خامن MPDA هم زملاء بود أطراي ديان كت مو كم سكاتي وديني أختهم زوف قطة فيديو غزيرهم كمان قايلة كت أخذوا يوما أطراي كت قالوا تبخايبة أو ديات بريش ديان مغزيهم كناشة هاني زكم سكاتي هيران عبني
ميقرب كريس بومن رابا هيرانا بيه عبرا بسيمة هين
قطو سام لخينا دي خدنا سيمبوزيوم بتاعنا
دوسيلا
كماي ما خينا لا
واشنطن تو
أسرة
يعني
بجون
في اللايبراري اوف كونغرس تو يعني
أسرة بجون خب أطرح موقع السيمبوزيوم قد باشتا متونيتا رابط ناشر ليبه كل PhD بتاعنا كتهمزمي بتأمتا أطريتا كنخراجي سجلابري كونغرس إلى أسرة بجون تو يعني خدري الله زوجة بخراجنا حيرت لازمه لا خطر منهم كان پرسوك جاو شركنا
سيمو باربولا خنا او بوش اسيرولوجيست مشام هلا كتانا كتن دكتور دابرنيت تعمل ورابا PhD خينتين طلع دانا من ديان طلع دانا سيشنتين هذا كل نخرايب تاعي تمام سبدايتن جو واشنطن DC أطراي رابا بش خدشنا باصورنا إن اسم بس أخشمتي مش داور بشتلا مريستا الإتوتا بيتالا أسرة بيرخا.
Wartan, would you please put that section from symposium I gave you?
Relating to the Assyrian people in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Parliament this week is focused quite rightly on the budget and on the robust political debate in Australia. But we shouldn't forget that there are people around the world.
أترمو قارو بابا أنا ودي يمان دك خارطة كتير يولي خدنا فيديو قد مغزيب عليه نديلا كت لا متخراري امن كم تمتيله هذه مريشه بدون تخلع سامت الى كم تبدو وزيخ الشمت دكتا كاتوم تاع نخله برضه انت فرايتين الشترو كأسرى بيرخه خاصة مديو ولا بدون تخلق زيمون لا خان اتلو خان وهارا ما يبادو لي مجرب يشرب ايويد امريكا بعدو لا شغل لا
هي ايويد امريكا بعدو لا خشمتي الراما بشرا بكامس نهارية ولا البتة بخشام سبب او مشتلان ايويل جو لوس انجلس ان رابط دقرانتلا سبب سيمبوزيوم كانوا خراي بياشلي بلتا بخيكمناش كل بي اتش دي رابط ماريوترانا اتا بخشام خيكمايت زويز جمنا خيكمايت زويز سنيقنا الله
كامو زويز لازم مير $3 خرجبتو يعني
هي تلاقي
تصرف في هذه الجمعنا شو صرف بخيني لازمينا
همون 15 بخينه سنيقنا الله ايتر خامدي رابا ليلي ان هدام تاكس رايد اوف سينا ان هدام بيانا خا زوجة هايري انا بخشافن رابا انا نقيت لقيت كما جلد شادريلون سبب اسمبوزيوم جلدويتا شارويلا اسرة بي يرخ شارويلا
اسرة بيرخد مي هنا جون مخليتها
جوني لخينا
اسرة بجون
هي اهم شيء داور بيشنا بليخنا الله قد شوفها شكلها إذا رابع خدينا قد بوش ناشلو ديله هلبته ناش من دكان بريش بيتاينا إذا خيطران رابع جورة بتاعه كانوا خراية لا أطراي سبب أطراي هذا مري جو واشنطن خدشنا إنا جو رابع نخراي بتاعه جدا سيمبوزيوم
قلت دويتي دي نخراي ويني احنا كان ماضي اخوات كان نخراي كان بضايق بديان عارفين كان بديان كان سبويلر بضايق ما يبخ تشيل كان سبويلر بضايق مت مديان الدنيا هيرب وفيديو مت هيرتي مردوت الدنيا احنا شركه بق كان خش بصورته دغ بضايق
جورج خامدي رابع دقران له رابع ماريوتران له سبب كل civilization الأطراية من دارت دانت جباروتا هل أديم يوما بيشهم زمت الله بخيت مناش ليبه جاري احنا رابع سيريس تو كخله بخيت مناش ليبه او باسمت ايو اي اشولفتولا او ميقرا كارلو جنجا اخ برميتي الى مشتلانو ايتا شمية من قد رابط شلشة قد شوبة شكله بداها بنا أمتي مغبة نمسيتون هيرنيتون لون رابطنا من تبتابق من نوخون أنا بطلب هتمنى سيمبوزيوم بيشا هويرت
خب دانو تیتراتور مغبة از اخن خاقت فيديو كت خاص هم ديو نيخون دكاتو مغزيلن مريشة بدون تخله سباش ميموله قديرتي برشميتوخون كاتوخون بديو بتانخن داخل سايل خش و تاسع آتوراي جالوتا شولانو مغزيالون قد أمساني أدخل برسوبة جو برلمان دیگه جو برلمان دو آترا بديو هم زميني داخل مودلا دات DVD خاز فيديو خازخن بعدم تمن أموخو مدري كدو سامخينه باسي مرا.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I move the motion relating to the Assyrian people in the terms which it appears on the notice paper. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Parliament this week is focused, quite rightly, on the budget and on the robust political debate in Australia. But we shouldn't forget that there are people around the world facing the most horrendous of circumstances. Included in that are the Assyrian people of Iraq and Syria, who are currently being subject, it must be said, to genocide. The Assyrians, the indigenous Christian people of Iraq and Syria, have long suffered persecution, particularly since the fall of Saddam Hussein. But since the rise of ISIS, Islamic State, we have seen an attempt to eradicate the Assyrian people, to destroy their culture and their heritage. Recently, the United States Secretary of State described ISIL as genocidal by self-proclamation, by ideology and by actions. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has said, "I'm sure we now have enough evidence that what is happening is genocide, deliberately aimed at destroying not only the lives but wiping out the existence of Christians, Yazidis and other religious minorities in the Middle East in territory controlled by ISIS." It is right and proper that this House associates itself with these sentiments and declares that enough is enough, the genocide must stop. The Syrian people have been subject, of course, to persecution for many, many years. The world has witnessed the destruction of Assyrian holy sites, of ancient cultural artefacts and the obliteration of places of worship. We've seen the footage of masked men with sledgehammers rampaging through museums and galleries in an attempt not only to kill Assyrians but to destroy the heritage and culture of this great and ancient civilisation. It cannot be allowed to occur. It is right and proper that the United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide make recommendations through the Secretary-General to the Security Council to recognise, prevent and halt crimes being perpetrated by Islamic State. It is also right, as we have said before, the member for Fowler, the member for Cornwall and other members of the House with the support of the Deputy Leader of the Opposition have said before that it is right also that we plan for a post-Islamic State world for the Assyrian people in which they can live in Iraq in particular in freedom, in their homeland in freedom, with all the necessary protections and the necessary ability to make their own decisions within Iraq for their own protection. This is very important. We can't simply wait and hope and pray and work for the defeat of Islamic State without planning for the future. The Syrian community in Australia has been very vocal in ensuring this is the case, particularly the Syrian Universal Alliance led by Hermes Shaheen and David, who again have worked with myself, the member for Cornwall, the member for Fowler, the member for Kingsford Smith and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and have met with the Leader of the Opposition to progress this case. And it is them, I know, who are also very keen to see this motion adopted in the House of Representatives, as does every Assyrian Australian, as does every Australian concerned about human rights anywhere. The Assyrian people had been forced from Iraq in massive numbers. Many of them were forced from Iraq into Syria, seeking refuge in Syria, and they have now been forced out of this nation, which has given them some degree of protection over the last 10 years, into other countries in the Middle East. Many Assyrians have sought and achieved home in Australia, refuge in Australia. They have become fine and upstanding Australians, but they do not rest and will not rest until their brothers, their sisters, their cousins can achieve the same protections as they do, and not necessarily by seeking asylum elsewhere. I have not met an Assyrian who seeks to leave Iraq out of choice. Assyrians have been forced out of Iraq. This is a land which has provided their homeland for thousands of years. This is an ancient and noble civilisation which has done so much for the world. They have been subject, as I said, to terrible, terrible incidents since the fall of Saddam Hussein, but none worse than what they are being subjected to now, which it can clearly, soberly and regretfully be concluded is genocide. Attempted genocide which cannot be allowed to succeed. We cannot look back on this age and think if only the world had done more, we would not have lost one of the world's great civilisations, the ancient Assyrian civilisation. The ancient Assyrian civilisation which has given the world so much over many thousands of years, and it is time for the world to step in and offer them some protection in return.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I move the motion relating to the Assyrian people in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper.
زمتا شميارو كدموينا بعد أستراليا كغيرت تأثيرات كتينا جيالوتا بخايا سبيشك كمرة من قاعات الجانا كاتن شدنا سوريا من سوريا مدري كامونا كذا زبراي خادك تكدينيش خاب كونسبيرسي تكتمسيني أطراي متان فلطيلون بالقرداية بالداعش بالدنخينة إنجليز زكاتها يورو لا أمريكا زكاتها يورو كتمسي أن أطروات ديان أوبردين شكليله دخكو يعني كدين قتلني فرمي من بتفاتن فلطيلان دني تلتر جاشوك لأنهم صايك كما جنات داعش كايت بقى ايسس بقراينا كداني بربسي اوديو يوم مدري خيشوا جو خامنو تاعت التلسكوبي تام باي شكلي بالا يعني بومبا متنا باي وازي قمات اوتراي كما تك بيكونا انا من ينقبو منا هيش خاناش قدني يلزل المعروف اینو بسم تو استرالیا بس مگانو که شلون کد بعدیلا آخرتم ویرن جو پارلمانت استرالیا بوده قصتهم زمنا
بشن لهايران قشمت استراليا رابا هايران رابا قشية بالخانة أبي رابا بسمي يعنوخم قد خارج الشعبي رشولة بعدتم
وترى مغب شبا بيرخ الشبتة هرا شبتة بتايلا لا مشيتم جو سيدني استراليا خادن ديمونستريشن تو يعني قد كل أطراء تيمون تام شريكهم رابا خلان ديمونستريشن تو يعني رابا خلان بتاعيني بتبش مغزية قد كان بيش الدنيا أختوخون قد أستراليا بخيتهم قم ملبورن بخيتهم يعني قم دينات أستراليا قد خضروان سيدنيتهم تيمون قد أيوم شريكهم شبا بيرخ شبتة شارويله كل يوم بتوين ديمونستريشن مديت تحولات أطراء بتيبل بريشيد جو أطرت أبعاتن جو بد نهرن أطرت أطر بس بعد من نوخون شماخن تاما خزخلخون تاما تيمون المشاركانه هايرون كدا ديمونستريشن كمت بوزو دا بغيو جاتانه كما بوزو دا بغيو خيابان همزوم بدراي قال تانويه بس ولا كشوران ديني از لامشيتم شبا بيرخه هر شفت بتايلا ديمونستريشن جو سيدني جيبت ايويت وجوان قضيه خامات دي اشولا بيدونا كتامسني كل جوان قضيه جو استراليا ايدا يوبنا كتا من دي باريل اويتون تمام مقوخ مدويه وتحولات الأطراء دي داخل كما كمرش الخزاخم تاتم تاون قدو سابقينا كنت همزمت انترفيوت ميكرا نوري بتبابا من بروفيسور ترافيس شماخلا مويداله باسي برا
جورج
تا به امروز ماست بختیاری صدف رو امتحان کردید؟ خیلی خوشمزه است.
دوغ بختیاری صدف رو چی؟
خوش طعم و دلپذیره.
تمام مزه ماست بختیاری صدف یادآور همان لبنیات منطقه بختیار در ایران است.
دوغ بختیاری صدف رو نوش جان کنید و با ماست بختیاری صدف سفره خودتون رو زیبا و کاملتر کنید. بله، انتخاب صدف انتخاب بهترین است.
رایحه اتکلون و عطر شما نشانه شخصیت شماست که پرفیوم اوتلت با بیش از 6000 نوع عطر و اتکلون معروف دنیا در خدمت شماست. معروفترین عطرها گوچی، ورساچی، کارتیه، کلوین کلاین، دولچه اند گابانا، بربری، هیوگو باس، جورجیا آرمانی و سایر برندها همه کاملا است و با بسته‌بندی اورجینال در پرفیوم اوتلت. این یک حقیقت است با 10 تا 60% زیر قیمت دیپارتمنت استورها. این عطرها بهترین سوغاتی در سفر به ایران یا هدیه نوروز، کریسمس، تولد، سالگرد ازدواج، روز گرامی داشته مادران و پدران و سایر مراسم است.
من فرشید به اتفاق سایر همکارانم مقدم شما همزبانان عزیز رو گرامی می‌داریم.
پرفیوم اوتلت همه روز غیر از شنبه ها از 9 صبح تا 8 شب. تلفن 818 992 34 65 عضو 08 و 50 50 100.
یه ساندویچ بهم بدین بدون خیارشور.
بدون خیارشور نمیشه.
بدون خیارشور.
چی میگه این جور نمیشه؟ این ساندویچ جور نمیشه. بدون خیارشور نمیشه. اینم بدون خیارشور.
این چی بود؟
زرینه.
خیارشور زرینه. خیارشور زرینه، ترد و لذیذه. اینه محصول بهترینه. یه ساندویچ بهم بدین بدون خیارشور.
بنام تن مغب بشلام على خون أنا نوراي بتبابا بنام تن مغب بشلام على خون أنا نوراي بتبابا بيتامم برز غزفت أطرايد أديوم اتلنخا انترفيو من خام يقرأ جبارة بروفيسوري ل international law جو فلوريدا جو يونيفرسيتي كمقرة اترابا بغداية قطع بروفيسور كشمو إلى هانيبال ترافيس بتقاوى أمان بتبقرخ لخش مبوقار رابع أننقاية وإتلن هيفي أختوهن على شكليتن يوترانا ومرشانا من دا خرسة أبيتنا باسيمين قا جشكتوهن ومشمتوهن. Mr. Travis, this is Noray. I welcome you to Assyrian American today.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's a great honor to have you with us. I think we did an interview a couple years ago, and I'm happy to have you again. If you'd be kind enough, briefly introduce yourself one more time, please.
So I'm a law professor living in Florida. I do research on the Assyrian genocide, and I've written a book about a comparison between the Armenian and Syrian genocide of 1915 to 1924 or so, to the Anfa campaign and the situation in Iraq after 1963 or so, and then another comparison to the situation in Sudan since the 1960s or so. That book came out in 2010. Since then, I've been publishing a variety of book chapters and studies about the Assyrian genocide, comparing it to other genocides and to the theory of the definition of genocide and of the sociology and legal study of genocide.
Very well. At this moment in time, Mr. Travis, what activity do you have regarding Assyrian cause? Is that only genocide, or there is anything else that you are doing?
My activity is mostly about either the study of the World War I genocide, or increasingly I've been studying the situation in Iraq and Syria since 2004, 2005. I was one of the first people to write articles about the refugee crisis in Iraq from a legal perspective. One of the first people to write about the destruction of the cultural heritage of Iraq and Turkey in a law journal, talking not only about the Assyrians, but the Yazidis, Mandaeans, even the Shiites and Sunnis, destroying one another's cultural heritage and targeting religious sites, the theft of Sumerian and Akkadian and Assyrian and Babylonian artifacts from under the ground, and of course the rise of ISIS and its allies in Syria and around the world, and their negative impact and expulsion and extermination of Assyrians from Mosul, Nineveh Plains, Kirkuk, eastern Syria, places like that. And then finally, there is this project called the Council for the Assyrian Parliament, which is sort of in a very early stage, but I gave them my comments on their mission statement and some of their early planning, but the real planning of that has been taken over by other people, and they're handling the logistics and so forth.
Yeah, I will ask you that. It's my next question, but before I go there, have you published any of your findings regarding 2004, 2005 genocide that we people, they can go ahead and read it and see what's going on?
Sure. So, one of the first articles I wrote about the Assyrian genocide of World War I wrote in the end about what was happening in 2004, 5, and 6 in Iraq, and whether there was going to be a repetition or some kind of an echo or a threatened imitation of the Ottoman genocide of the Assyrians by these extremist groups in Iraq that were attacking churches, kidnapping women, driving the Assyrians out of Basra was one of the first places. Then they were targeting the churches in Baghdad and Mosul. That came out in 2006. People can read that by Googling the phrase Native Christians Massacred. That's the first part of the title. Then in 2007, I published this article about the cultural property issue, the attacks on archaeological sites, religious sites, manuscripts, but also driving people from their historic communities and so forth. That one's called The Cultural and Intellectual Property Interests of the Indigenous Peoples of Turkey and Iraq. People can get that by Googling cultural property indigenous Iraq or something like that. Then I published this article about the refugee flight. And the problem in that time, and actually surprisingly it's continued, is that I noticed in 2006 or 7 or 8 that some of the refugees, oftentimes they call themselves Chaldeans, but they're also Assyrians and Syrian Orthodox or so-called Syriac Orthodox, who were trying to file their asylum and refugee lawsuits in the United States to try to prevent deportation. The government was saying, well, there's a democracy in Iraq, everything's fine, there's random crime, but there's nothing to be afraid of in terms of persecution. You should be sent back if you didn't come the regular way through some kind of economic or family-related visa. And I wrote an article criticizing that, saying actually there is persecution, and there are extremist groups present that will cause people to flee. And this really only got on the radar of Western media and maybe some of the legal establishment, with the 2014, 2015 time frame, with the Kurds trying to take boats from Turkey to Greece and so forth, and other Syrian, they call them refugees, but you could question whether they're refugees if they've already been to Turkey, and because there's a lack of anti-Sunni persecution in Turkey if they're Sunnis. So that was the other piece. That's called After Regime Change, United States Law and Policy with Respect to Iraqi Refugees. I have some more pieces, but those are the first few.
Thank you very much. You were talking about the parliament a few months ago in Chicago. I believe you were involved with writing a bylaw for creation of a parliament, which was a fantastic idea. I personally liked it very much so. There were very educated, knowledgeable people in that committee. I just didn't hear much after that. What was the reason?
I did not write the bylaws. I was involved in the mission statement. I gave some comments on the mission statement, but the bylaws, I believe, were handled by a committee of people who were in California, and I don't know exactly what happened with that. I haven't received that many updates. Part of the reason I thought this was a good project is, the Armenians have this association called the Armenian National Council of America, ANCA, or Armenian National Committee, of America, ANCA. And they do things like they lobby for Armenian genocide recognition, they lobby for aid to go to Armenia, they talk about Nagorno-Karabakh, other places where Armenians are at risk or something. They criticize various events that happen that affect Armenians negatively. And of course, Assyrians need the same thing. We're much worse off than Armenians. Number one, Armenians have a country, they have an army, they have all the cultural institutions of a state, they can preserve all of their manuscripts and churches and artifacts in museums. Assyrians have no state. They're sometimes working within the Kurdish mini-state. They have some role within the Iraqi state, which is very ineffective and corrupt, of course. And of course, there's a lack of protection and preservation of Assyrian manuscripts, churches, artifacts, historical mementos, and so forth, and even oral history and things like people's documents from the early Iraqi period or the Ottoman period and so forth is not protected and is not well cataloged. We have a project called the Modern Assyrian Research Archive to do some of that collection, led by Thomas Issik from Sweden. But it has a lack of funding compared to Armenian and projects and other groups' projects. So the idea was that there would be a place for all the Assyrian groups to come together and cooperate on educating the public in different countries about the Assyrians' needs, objectives, appeals, petitions, goals, and so forth. There are already moves towards this. The Assyrian Federation is supposed to be a federation of local associations that performs this role, but it does not have as much of a presence as the ANCA does. There's a similar federation in Europe. They've just strengthened their ties between the German, Swedish, Belgian and French and other Assyrians in a federation of European associations. But the idea was we need to have a place where delegates, representatives would come from all these different groups and then debate issues and come to resolutions or conclusions and then present them outside of the community. But it's taken a long time to do the bylaws, as you mentioned.
As you know, today I read that Assyrian Confederation was established in European Confederation was established in Brussels. And that is a great news because of that can become a unity between the Parliament of Europe and they can progress and they can improve their relationship. And what do you think? Can we have the same thing? I mean, the Federation or the Parliament of America can join them. Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, that was the goal of the Assyrian Parliament originally. Would be to include the European and Australian and other Assyrians and people in the Middle East also, as well as the American ones, in some kind of a virtual dialogue, some kind of building of relationships, formulation of goals and ideals, and of course other groups already have this. Turkey coordinates all these different Turkish groups all over the world to articulate the Turkish line, and they're very successful. They persuade countries to adopt false and really counterproductive policies that Turkey say will be in the interests of NATO or other blocs, and it's in part because of the cooperation they achieve between all these communities around the world. And you can go down the list of other groups who are, persecuting or denying the rights of the Assyrians. They're doing the same thing in an international cooperation. So, if there's to be resistance to that or some kind of voice to speak out against it, different people are going to have to cooperate from different groups and not simply be one small group here, one small group there. So that was the idea that some people had. And I, helped maybe suggest some ways that they could copy what other associations have done.
There are some, I should say, small armies of Assyrian in Syria, in Iraq. They are trying to protect their towns, their people. What have you heard of it? What is your knowledge about it? Can they be successful and are they safe? What is your idea?
I don't know that much about it other than the fact that they're, of course, outnumbered by other groups in the area. After Saipho, there's very small groups of Assyrians compared to the other people. So it's difficult to imagine how they could be successful against such large groups of hostile people.
Do you think Assyrian problem for all past many years have been that they've never had a code of conduct to work on? The code of Danta, Armenian had it, Jews had it, even Tamilis had it, even some of them before even World War I. And they improve of their relationship, they improve of their culture, of nationality, but we haven't had that. How can we get it? Code of conduct, I think is very important for us to have it.
Yeah, there have been people who've tried to achieve this goal over the years. There was the Assyrian delegation to the Paris Peace Conference. People came together from different communities to present the Assyrian claims for territory and reparations after the war and the massacres. Part of the problem was that some of the people or some of the groups that cooperated in that had to make deals eventually with Turkey, with Iraq, with Syria, and so their voice had to die out because they made a deal not to complain. Basically, the system in the Middle East is if you don't complain, you can get by, but if you complain, you are at risk of very bad thing. So one can understand why they made this decision, but it left mainly the Western groups to speak out on these issues, and they did what they could with their federations and magazines and so forth. But it has a limited impact to be a diaspora without a headquarters coordinating or cooperating with you, because everything that is said can be dismissed as a foreigner's sour grapes or something like that. So the Armenians, seem to have more coordination between the American Armenians and the Armenian Armenians. Of course, it's easier for them. They've conquered this place with the help of, the Soviet Union, and they have this place to live. And luckily for them, it was not totally taken over by Russians, which is basically the Assyrian situation. So you can't really compare the two situations, but that is what is needed in the long run to be imitated in order to have some kind of effective advocacy or discussion of these issues.
Well, I truly think that code of conduct is very important to work on, to have it, so our people, they can go and they can work on it. That will bring us our culture back. It will unite us. Everybody will be on the same path. However, don't you think, as I see everybody, I hear it quite a lot, that they're talking for preservation, for having us not to be melted in foreign countries. We should have a land together, to all of us to get together somewhere, somehow. Of course, we have to have a job, we have to have income, we have to have a living. But that's the idea I recently been hearing from many peoples. Could that be possible?
Well, the problem is in the Middle East, the numbers of people are so small compared to the number of hostile people that I don't see how they could have a viable, territory. After World War I, you could imagine, because the Kurdish population was much smaller, the Arab population was much smaller, that you could have a Syrian territory that could compete with a Kurdish or an Arab territory and maybe get some help. Like Armenia got a lot of help from Russia and the United States and to get off the ground. But the problem is today, the Kurdish population is so large, and the Arab population is so large, and the Turkish population is so large that if you put 200,000 Assyrians in some plain or some suburb of Erbil or something, that it would be very easy for it to be gobbled up, infiltrated, and taken over by these neighboring people. And they would oppose it being created in the first place, because they would say, well, look at all the Kurdish villages in the middle. Look at all the Arabs who live there. It has to be part of some bigger thing. And moreover, if it wasn't for President Obama, this whole area would be taken over by ISIS already. So you have to think about that. All these areas, Nineveh Plains, Ankawa, all that would be ISIS territory if it wasn't for the United States and Britain intervening. So it's an unstable, unsafe place to live. It's only very precariously held on to by foreign intervention. So it's a plan that has a lot of difficulty in the present population and strategic context.
I don't know if it's a. I want to ask you a question. I don't know if I should ask it or not. Why is it that I have a feeling, maybe many have a feeling, that the government, the European and America, they don't want Christian in Middle East. Why is it that we have such a thinking that these European and America, they don't want Christian in Middle East?
On the one hand, it has a positive side, this policy, letting people escape as refugees to the West. Many of my aunts and uncles came to the U.S. this way. I've met many people who live in Europe today, or Australia, or other places who, their parents were from Turabdin or Iraq or Persia, other places, and they've been welcomed as refugees. They have a good life today. They're pursuing academic possibilities, and they're doing well. On the other hand, you could say there's a downside to this, which is that the cultural institutions and the historic presence of this group in Middle Eastern cities and towns is going to disappear, according to all projections, because of a combination of persecution, seeking better opportunities, and general instability and poverty. So could Western countries improve the situation by changing their policy? Maybe. They certainly, if it wasn't for the Western countries, a lot of the Kurds of northern Iraq would probably live in Turkey today, because they were fleeing over the mountains on foot or with, cars or animals to flee, government of Iraq. They basically established a zone for the Kurds to live and gave them all kinds of money and made many of them very rich to have a Kurdish zone. Now they have this Kurdish zone, and something similar could have been done with an Assyrian mini zone, or even the Kurdish government for a while was talking about this, having a administrative region or something for Assyrians to come to from different parts of Iraq, because they were fleeing Basra, they were fleeing Baghdad, they're fleeing other places. But, would it have been a stable solution? Would it have been defensible in light of these other large populations of non-Assyrians in the region? Is difficult to say.
On an issue, many association and Assyrian organization, they did talk to American government to get some help. And I do see that they're talking and they're asking, but they don't get the solid results. What else can they do? You think that's all they can do, or is there any other thing that they are not doing?
Well, if you look at other groups, sometimes they refuse to vote for people who are not going to give their movement aid. So, like, the Armenians, if there was somebody in Los Angeles who wasn't going to vote for Armenian genocide, they would, like, run this person out of town and not vote for him and give money to the other guy and so forth and so on. Or if there was somebody running for office who, supported the Palestinians over the Israelis, they would have a lot of problems with different lobby groups and so forth, and different voting communities and all this kind of thing. That's the way you persuade politicians to do something. Otherwise, they don't care. Otherwise, they're going to go to people who give them money, who are the defense companies, the oil companies, the big companies, who have good relationships with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, these other problematic states that are causing some of these problems. So unless there's a counterweight to those lobbyists in local communities, not much is going to be done. People sometimes talk about Anna Eshoo. Anna Eshoo will introduce a bill or make a statement about this or make a statement about that. But, you have to wonder, is there a time that's going to come when she has to really, hold other things up for this Assyrian issue the way that other politicians would do? Other politicians sometimes filibuster, or they try to hold something up, or they leave for another party because they object to a lack of attention to their issue. When is the Assyrian issue going to be that important is a question to ask.
What is our priority at this time with this situation that's going on right at this moment? What should be our priority?
I think that, Bosnia is an interesting example. During Bosnia, it was commonly said that, there's persecution of the Bosnian Muslims by the Serbs. We need to bring them to the U.S. as refugees, and also support the Bosnians, sort of politically over there. So they brought something like, 10,000 in a few months Bosnian Muslim refugees in a few months. And that was at the same time that the Bosnians had a pretty successful political movement and an army to protect themselves. The Assyrians don't have an effective army and are not protecting themselves. They're fleeing most of the time from conflict. They're not, conquering new cities from the federal government like the Bosnians were at that time. So we need to have something similar for the Assyrians to bring, 20, 30, 40,000 Assyrians to the United States, and the same thing for Britain, and the same thing for Germany, and the same thing for Australia, because it is unsafe over there. John Kerry, accepted the congressional proposal to declare a genocide against both Christians and Yazidis in Iraq, as well as others like Mandaeans. So there's an active, ongoing genocide there. The people need to be evacuated. There is no stable future for them, clearly. Many times, governments have said, okay, we've secured the situation. There was a chaotic situation for a while. Now we're bringing security. Every time that has failed. And it's going to fail again. Because money is coming in from all over the world to destabilize Iraq and Syria. Men are coming in from all over the place. They're selling priceless antiquities on the international market to fund their operations, and nobody can stand up to that.
I see. Mr. Travis, they're telling me that I have 2 minutes time. I have one last question, if you can be brief on it. That's the idea I have. We do have to have lobbyists everywhere. To generate money for these lobbyists, I think everyone have to donate or share $30 a year, which is not much, to their organization or to their churches, that they get all together and give them to the lobbyists. They will be working for us in all governments around the world. Is that can be done? Is that the idea, a good idea?
Yes, I mean, many people give money to, for example, Christian Solidarity International, which was lobbying for this genocide recognition many years before it happened. People give money to the Federation or to the Armenian Committee or similar groups, and that is how lobby groups raise money. People have to give their dues, just like a union. It's difficult to raise money when you can't point to successes you've had. The Armenians can always say, well, we achieved this or that. Another $1 billion went to Armenia last year. And so it's easier for them to write a letter raising money when they can say that. Whereas it seems like with the Syrians that, other groups are always out lobbying them. So it's difficult to point to victories and say, give us more money, we just want a victory. But that is what has to be done if you're going to compete in the lobbying game, is my impression.
Mr. Travis, it was a pleasure to have you on with us this time again. Hopefully in the future we will have more talks useful like this, and hope to see you here in Los Angeles. Looking forward to it. I thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much. بنونتي مغبة عبيتم باسيمي قد يشكتوخن ومشمتوخن عدي شوكنوخن بشينا.
Mani vorun qati, mani vorun qati, rekhab min yemi yukhati, chumrina manatra dagahi, iki dunya azina, که دنیا ازینا خبنیت ختمت